questions that could be asked. Now, I do this even though I'm fairly certain you probably will not have a problem that asks you about outliers specifically with a data set. I do know that you're going to see that one problem similar to problem number 23 or 24 that was on the Central Tennessee question that had 45 pieces of data, and you had to tell it what the median, what the maximum, what the minimum, what the quartiles, what the interquartile range was, what the fences were, and then find out whether there were any outliers, and then determine what the graph looked like, and then explain the significance of it. So going through this problem and just targeting outliers will take us through all the steps you'd have to have for that problem. So I know you're going to see a problem similar to that, and it will be a large data set. I complain about it every semester because the challenge is not making a mistake in typing the data in. If the data is not typed in right, then you're screwed. But I also know that there will be one problem they give you where they don't give you the data set, they give you the 5-number summary, and they ask you, what's the significance of those values? Okay, so here, how would you attack this problem if we were to ask you what the outliers are?
Look for the highest number that's different from the rest.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to come up with a 5-number summary. I have to find a 5-number summary, which means I've got to dump those pieces of information into the calculator, let the calculator do its thing, and then spit it out. That's all it amounts to. Okay, so in this problem, since this is the same problem I did at the beginning of class, or I did for my last class in here, I'm going to have a minimum value. It isn't the same problem, I changed it. So guess what? We need to put that data into the calculator. So stat, calculate, take that existing information, and we're going to get rid of it. I'm not going to get rid of it, I'm just going to move it someplace else. Okay, because I might want to come back and use that so I don't have to type in the other stuff that was sitting there. Oops, now see what I just did? I wasn't careful, I got up into my label and I hit the delete key. And sure enough, it took list number 1 completely off the screen of my calculator. So now I got to go back to stats and I got to run setup editor to be able to get that list back. I did not mean for it to take that list off of the screen. I meant to erase the list, which is a clearing function, not a deleting function. So now, data in 10, 18, 15, 49, 16, 19, 13, 21, 12, another 19, 27, a 26, a 4, and a 23. So I have 14 pieces of data, if I counted right. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, okay? First of all, visually, looking at that set of data, are there any values there that in your mind are excessively large or small compared to the rest of the data? Any numbers that jump out and slap you in the face and say, whoa, that's really small compared to everything else, or that's really big compared to everything else? 4 and 49, okay? Those are opinions right now. And I value your opinion, but until you can get everybody else to agree with you, it ain't a fact, okay? So the factual side of things is to go back and to look at what the numbers tell you about what's agreed upon. So my minimum value in this list, well, first of all, now that I have the list in right, I go to calculate, I do one variable statistics, and those of you that got the newer 84 get the menu view of the screen. Your X list is list number 1, your frequency list is always empty, and you calculate. Us, we end up telling it that we want to put it into list number 1, or do that work, and there is nothing on this first screen that is part of the 5-number summary. That's all part of the stuff that's normal distribution stuff. The 5-number summary is the second page. So my minimum value, get rid of that, quit. My minimum value was 14. My quartile number 1 was 13, 18.5, 23, and 49. Minimum value, 4. Quartile number 1 was 13. Median value was 18.5. By the way, when you analyze questions of this particular type, and you start talking about real world things, because one of the problems that you had the analyzing was on like number of points scored by a basketball team. I had several people miss the median because the median on their data set turned out to be 18.5. And they're saying, wait a second, how can you score 18.5 points in a basketball game? You can't. So they rounded it off. They don't want you to round off up there. So forget the practical application. If they say, what's the median value, leave it exactly as it says, or the quartiles for that matter. So median value is 18.5 for this problem. Quartile number 3 was 23.
23.
And then the maximum value
49.
turned out to be 49. So those values you're going to need to refer to again somewhere along the line. They may not ask you for this immediately, but farther down the line in that long question, they asked you what the 5-number summary was. And part of the reason they asked you for that 5-number summary a second time was to get it close to your questions, so that you could see it next to the questions so that it continued to scroll back up on your calculator. And there were a lot of miscopy problems out there. What's not going to be on your test is the interquartile range formula. You're expected to know what the interquartile range value is, commonly referred to as IQR. Inner, or inter, as some people say, quartile, inter, between the quartiles. What's between the quartiles means that we're talking about Q3 minus Q1. That will not be on your test. That is a vocabulary-based question that they expect you to understand. So in this particular case now, I'm doing 23 minus 13. I come up with an interquartile range value that's going to be equal to 10. Do I need to show 23 minus 13? Great, okay. Now, what is going to be on your test are the formulas for the lower fence and the upper fence. Lower fence is an excessively small value, so it's farther away from quartile number 1 than what you were expecting. And it's 1.5 times the interquartile range. That will be there. I would still suggest that you show the setup step of what you did for that particular problem. So in this particular case, 13 minus 1.5 times your value of 10. Well, 1.5 times 10 is 15. So 13 minus 15 gives me a value which is equal to a negative 2. Okay, well here we're talking about spelling questions, and someone says, wait a minute, how can I have a negative 2 questions wrong? Well, you can't. But that's an artificially derived value that simply helps you identify what is agreed upon as being excessively small. Are there any errors smaller than a negative 2? There are no excessively small values. So your opinion of 4 was smaller than the rest of the values? Yes, it is smaller than the rest of the values, but not significant enough to call it an outlier. It's just different, okay? But it's not weird yet. Well, if that's the case, then we come back and do the same thing with the upper fence. Upper fence is excessively large. So that means you're farther away from Q3 than we normally expect to be. Only this is going to be a plus 1.5 times our interquartile range. Which means now we have that value of 23 plus the 1.5 times 10, and 1.5 times 10 is still 15. So 23 plus 15 gives me a value of 38, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so now any value bigger than 38 is an outlier. There are no excessively small values, but are there excessively large values? Is there possibly more than one?
Yes.
And if there's more than one, you are obligated to nail all of them. So go back to your, so I'll do this. When they do that on the program, they're not promising you there's more than one. They're saying you could get more than one. I'm not giving you any hints. Because if they just say outlier, then you're going to write one number. That means you're going to go grab the maximum number right away, or the minimum number. So they're trying to keep you honest and be real, okay? So I'm looking now for values that are 38 or bigger. Well, as I start scanning, that's the only value that I see that's 38 or bigger. Okay, so there's only one outlier. The outlier was, ooh, no, I didn't want to do that. Go back. Go back. Where'd I go? I did that already, we did that already, we did that already. We didn't do that one yet. We didn't do that one. Oh, so I'm supposed to be going back here. Okay? So here we are. So to phrase that maybe a little bit more correctly, the only outlier is 49. So that was a poor little fifth grader that had an extremely bad day on their spelling test. Okay, so they only got one question right. I told you there's got to be somebody worse than me when it comes to spelling sometimes. Okay, so there they are. Just found them. So that's the only outlier. 49, right? That's the only value that's really small. Now, what's the significance of the 5-number summary? That's a question that you're going to see twice. You're going to see it as part of that big body question, and you're going to see it as a standalone.